All right, I'm really excited for our next session where I'm joined by Clare Louise Knox today, who's gonna help us shed some light on women's health and specifically PCOS in the workplace. Clare Louise is a business psychologist specializing in women's health at work, the founder and CEO of See Her Thrive. Clare also lives with PMDD, is a board director at the International Association for Premenstrual Disorders. She's an examiner for the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and lectures and researches on women's mental health at King's College in London. Clare, I am so excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be taking part in this. So thank you.
So to get us started, I mean, I spoke a little bit about your work, but it's always, very different to hear it from the person themselves. So do you want to share a little bit more about the work you do, specifically also with See Her Thrive? And yeah, let's learn a little bit about you and how you got into this line of work.
Absolutely. So I guess it all really started with my own experience of living and working with PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. A lot of people haven't heard of it, so I'll just give you a very quick overview. It is a menstrual related condition that it's a very, very severe form of PMS that a lot of women will experience, but it has some really awful psychological symptoms, and it can really impact all aspects of life. And work is where I really, really struggled to manage symptoms. I never told any of my colleagues what I was going through, what I was experiencing. And when I looked for, I went onto Google and looked at how do I tell my manager about PMDD? What workplace support is available for PMDD? I found nothing. And then I started to look at other women's health conditions, so PCOS, endometriosis, fibroids, and again, just this black hole really of workplace awareness and support. And I just thought, with 50% of the workforce being female, why are we not talking about this? Why is this not on the kind of corporate wellness agenda? And kind of made it my mission to break the silence around women's health at work. And that was really the start of the journey of See Her Thrive. And I retrained, I was a secondary school teacher, decided to retrain as an occupational psychologist, and focus on female-related health in the workplace. And here I am, 2, 3, 4 years later, however long it's been now.
Yeah. So generally from your work, what do you experience in terms of awareness among managers, among HR professionals, generally sort of in the workplace for women's health related issues? Is there awareness? Has it improved over this time that you've been working in this field?
That's a really, really great question. So in terms of awareness, I think it's really lacking actually. And what I would say is it's not deliberate ignorance. Mm-hmm. It is simply a case of we've never had to talk about these things before because we've never had as many women in the workforce. And I think it is genuinely just overlooked because of the silence around it. We as women haven't really been very open in discussing these problems. I said myself, I never talked about it at work because I was embarrassed, I was ashamed. And so it's a vicious cycle of we don't talk about it, so managers don't learn about these things, they don't become aware. In society, we don't educate people about these things. At school level, we don't include these conditions in any kind of sex and health and relationships education. And so it just perpetuates. And once you kind of start talking about periods, the menopause, whatever it is, you can see the light bulbs going off, and the reaction is generally, wow, I had no idea that A, this is a thing, this exists, and B, how this can impact people at work. This is a serious workplace issue, and this is something that we really need to and want to support. But that awareness piece, that education piece is key. It really is.
Are there any specific events in the workplace or like sort of situations in the workplace that usually trigger you being brought in a sense, or like, you know, your services being requested, so to say?
Usually, or not usually, in the past, there's been a number of different things that have kind of triggered that, if you like. Either an employee has got a condition and they're looking to kind of help their manager and the wider organisation to learn about it and how to support them. And so they will speak to their HR manager or their line manager, who will then reach out to us and get us in. Or it's, you know, people who are looking at ways to support and empower their female staff, because there's a lot of work at the minute around gender diversity and inclusion. So people who are responsible for that in the workplace and mental health and well-being will reach out and see what we can do in terms of raising awareness and training and education. So there are a number of things.
So is this, I mean, I know we sort of have an opinion on this, but is women's health in the workplace nice to have in terms of really, you know, kind of organizations learning more about this, doing more about this, supporting their female workforce better and more? Or are there actual sort of economic measures? I know, you know, specifically businesses and employers are often looking at sort of what's the impact of certain programs or courses that, you know, our managers are doing. Sort of, are there any hard facts that kind of you know, kind of speak to the return on investment of programs supporting women's health?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. There is definitely a strong business case for supporting women's health, without a shadow of a doubt. We only need to look at the current situation and the kind of inequalities in gender representation at the top of organisations to really understand, you know, there are things going on that are preventing women from progressing in their careers. And definitely this is part of that puzzle. And these conditions, so PCOS, endometriosis, PMDD, everything that we're talking about here within this women's health umbrella, the research tells us that they affect productivity, they affect engagement and motivation, and also absence and presenteeism. So if we can support women by putting in place some really simple strategies, making some minor adjustments, we can definitely improve those things and those measures. And one thing that is really prevalent, which again, this is sometimes overlooked, is presenteeism. And there was one really large study done, I think in the Netherlands, which came out last year, about the impact of menstruation on productivity and presenteeism. And that study found that actually employees who push through symptoms related to their menstrual cycle, who turn up to work when really they're not well enough to be there, the cost of that was something like 7 times more than actually just taking a day off. So that would really support the case for something like menstrual leave, whereby you grant employees 1 or 2 days off a month to deal with menstrual symptoms. So yeah, there's definitely a business case, and just acknowledging that we as females, we encounter these challenges sometimes on a monthly basis. You know, these are cyclical conditions that happen over and over again. Acknowledging that, recognizing our biological differences, that in itself can send out such a strong message of support, that people want to stay and work for that employer. And there is some kind of anecdotal evidence that suggests that if you recognize these things and you support them, then people are more likely to stay. We've talked about the issues around female talent, and we've got this global fight for female talent and a global shortage, apparently, of female talent. So this all helps to attract women and to keep women in the workforce. So it just some of the reasons why it makes business sense for companies to really embrace this and get on board with it. And just to say, I really hate having to talk about the business case, because there is a human and moral side to this, which is more important. But a lot of the times when you're in a corporate environment, as you've said, there has to be an ROI, and there has to be an impact on the bottom line, as it were. But yes, and I think, you know, younger generations are definitely more aware of inclusion and diversity, and they're looking for employers who have these values of inclusion and who go out of their way to support everyone's differences and individuality. And so I think things like women's health in the workplace will, dare I say, grow in popularity. Popularity is the wrong word, but I hope there's a kind of snowball effect as employers wake up and realise that it's a fundamental part of their employee wellbeing offering.
You already alluded to it a little bit, but how do these conditions generally show up in the workplace? Is it sort of obviously absenteeism, presenteeism, sort of how do different conditions, I know you've obviously done a lot of work in the PMDD space, also in the PC, maybe talk, I know you're doing a little bit of work researching PCOS at the moment. So how like, you know, sometimes having PCOS, we're not even so much aware of how different conditions affect us in the workplace, because it's somewhat compartmentalized, right? Like I kind of sometimes see it as my private problem that, you know, shouldn't affect others too much. And it's something I need to sort of just deal with to make sure I function. How do these things kind of affect women, or like not things, but like conditions affect women in the workplace on a regular basis?
That's really, really interesting. And thank you for sharing your personal experience. I can totally relate to that in terms of compartmentalizing it and trying to separate it out. Unfortunately, although we think that's happening, it's not necessarily how it manifests, as you've already alluded to. And just to kind of share a bit about, if it's helpful, a bit about my current situation, and give a bit of a personal story. So I have PMDD, as we've talked about, but I might also have PCOS, which is a very new thing. So for, oh goodness me, months, maybe a year now, I've been struggling with menstrual issues. My cycle has been unpredictable, which has been constantly on my mind. So as well as the physical aspect of dealing with this fatigue and the unknown, what is going on kind of thing, that kind of lack of control, that's been there constantly, like the white elephant in the room. And as you know, you can try and manage these things and while you're working be focused, but a lot of the time it can detract our attention and our focus and our concentration and make things really, really difficult. And that's true of anything really that's going on outside of work. It would be great if we could just put things into little boxes and kind of shut the chimp up, but in reality that doesn't happen. And sometimes our stresses and our worries and anxieties about our health do spill over into work settings. So we have times where we might be hypersensitive, we might be aggressive unnecessarily, and a lot of that comes back to the pressure that we're feeling or the stress that we're feeling, because it has to come out somewhere. If it doesn't come out in a work context, then the chances are it comes out towards a loved one, which is why, you know, relationships can really suffer as well. But in a broader sense, and in terms of how these things can manifest at work, we've talked about productivity and how conditions like PCOS can affect energy levels. You know, if you're trying to manage work around your cycle and you've got a really erratic, unpredictable cycle, maybe you have an unexpected period, and it can really throw you off kilter, and it can affect your schedule, your energy, how you interact, how you present yourself, everything really. And everyone has their own individual experience. In terms of the overall impact, I would say a lot of these conditions affect our confidence, and they can and do have an impact on confidence. And we can find it, you know, we can lose our way somewhat, we can lose our motivation, we can overanalyze things, question things a lot, and in a professional setting, that can be really difficult. So I think confidence, again, is something that perhaps we don't necessarily link with something like PCOS or PMDD, but it definitely is in there. And then we've got things on a more kind of practical level, which we've already spoken about briefly, but the absence. So, you know, being in pain to the point where you can't actually make it into work, or, you know, all of the other symptoms, migraines that are comorbid with menstrual conditions, mood, depression, anxiety, being crippled by these to the point that you can't leave home, you can't get into work. And actually at the moment, a lot of people might be feeling the benefits of being able to work from home, which, yeah, is great. If people are finding conditions easier to manage because of remote working, then that can only be a good thing. And then presenteeism, as we've talked about. And I think something that really does kind of overshadow all of this is, no matter what the symptoms are, there is this general theme of having to put on a mask and having to put on a brave face and just shutting up and putting up and getting on with it. And in some cases, that is also about overperforming in the workplace. I'm not going to get into all of the gender issues around that. As women, we do feel like we have to prove ourselves time and time and time again. And I think, I mean, from the research I did on PMDD, there is definitely a link to overcompensatory behaviour. So working longer hours, taking work home, working after hours, feeling this need to be seen and be present, which is why a lot of women don't take up flexible working, because there's a stigma around that as well. So this general sense of having to squash what's going on and keep it all in, and that just exacerbates the problems, and that exacerbates symptoms. And as I said earlier, it has to come out somewhere, and that's why, unfortunately, we see a lot of cases of, you know, for want of a better phrase, people losing their shit at work, because it gets to breaking point, and people have meltdowns, and people have these aggressions and these really emotionally driven moments that are somewhat impulsive and irrational, and it all comes from somewhere.
It's so interesting listening to you, because, you know, on the one hand, we talk so much in the context of workplaces about bringing your whole self to work and, you know, showing up as sort of the whole person, and, you know, you can't really separate the two. On the other hand, we still find it incredibly difficult to speak about these things, and, you know, kind of bringing it up in the workplace. So if I am a woman with PCOS, or, you know, any other sort of women's health condition for that matter, what would be your advice for me? Like, how do you start a conversation? Generally, is it better to start it with your direct manager? Do I talk to HR? Like, what would be some recommendations for women that might be affected? And yeah, I mean, you know, PCOS also, it's so multifaceted. So, you know, we obviously have, you know, sort of the menstrual issues, and I mean, you outlined it beautifully. It's kind of, you know, the also relational aspects of, like, you know, body image, and, like, you know, how do I look, and how do my coworkers perceive me, and then also the fertility struggles potentially, you know, that are kind of top of mind for a lot of women with PCOS, besides, you know, all the kind of menstrual issues. You know, am I ovulating, am I not ovulating, where's my period, why is it painful, what's happening with the cyst? So yeah, so I think it's just like really broad, and actually quite a lot of these conditions are just very complex. So to go back to the initial question, what's a good way to sort of bring that up in the workplace?
I'm not going to pretend that it's an easy conversation or it's a comfortable conversation, because it's not something that we talk about every day, and it's certainly not something that we talk about every day with our manager or our work colleagues. And as you said earlier, it is very personal, and we tend to separate personal and work, and so that makes it really hard to bring our personal issues into work. But from women I've worked with and my own experience, it can be incredibly liberating to be open. If you know, there are a lot of caveats to this. If you feel confident that your manager will do their best to support you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and also that you are confident in your ability to self-advocate, because that's essentially what you need to do. Because of the lack of awareness, you are probably going to have to do the whole education piece, and inform them of what the condition is and how it affects you and how it makes work difficult. And just to say also that a lot of these conditions are, if individual circumstances are met, they do have protection under the Equality Act, because it's, you know, PCOS, it's a long-term health condition. It affects all, you know, aspects of life. It can have severe impacts on daily life, and so that really is the grounds for disability. And I know we don't typically think of PCOS and or PMDD as being a disability, because we have this, again, a typical view of what disability is and what it looks like. But what that means from a kind of legal perspective is, if your employer knows that you have this health condition, PCOS, then they should do everything they can to support you. and make reasonable adjustments. So, you know, if you're asking to work from home 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, however many days, if you're asking for flexible working to manage PCOS, then your employer should be supportive of that and try to help you with that. If you're asking for time off to go to appointments, maybe you're going through fertility treatment, and God, I've got a friend who's just been through various different rounds of fertility treatment, and trying to organise that, because you have to plan it around ovulation and you don't know when that's going to happen or if it's going to happen, and you really need to have the flexibility of your employer to be able to just say, right, I need to go and do this now. So to come back, I'm sorry, I'm waffling here, but to come back to the point, they should really be supporting you. If they don't, and you've made them aware of the condition, they know about it, or they could reasonably know about it for another reason, then you've got grounds for discrimination. If you feel like you're being treated differently, so if you've had a conversation and you've disclosed PCOS, you've explained it to your manager, to your HR manager, whoever it is, and you've sensed that you're being, passed up for promotion, you're not being treated in the same way, then again, that's discrimination and you have got legal protection. What I would do, and it can be really helpful because of this lack of knowledge, if you decide that you want to talk to your manager, and it doesn't have to necessarily be your manager, it could be someone senior in the organisation that you've got a good relationship. I would say it's always better to have these conversations with someone you feel comfortable talking to. Arrange to have that conversation and perhaps just send a bit of a heads up ahead of time with some information about PCOS. So, an email just to say, I'd like to meet with you to talk about some health struggles or challenges I'm going through at the moment. I have a condition, it's called PCOS. You might not have heard of it. This is what it is. This is how it is affecting me. And then you've given them the opportunity to at least know what you're going to be talking about. A really great manager would then go away and do their own research and do their own reading. And we do hear about that, which is great. And another thing that can be really helpful is for you to sit down and just think about what some of those challenges are at work. What are you finding difficult because of the condition? And that is going to be dependent on the job and what it involves, and also how you're affected by PCOS, how it impacts you, because we all experience it differently. And just make a list and then work through that list and think about, okay, so what would help me if I'm finding this difficult? What would help me? And go to the meeting with a list of potential solutions that you've already thought about. Don't expect your manager to come up with that, because it's unlikely that they're going to know how to help you. And then after that, a really good thing to get into the habit of doing, and lots of people do this already, so sorry if I'm teaching Granny to suck eggs here, is to follow up the meeting, the conversation, with a summary of what was discussed, who was there, any kind of action that was agreed. So if your manager said, right, we need to have a conversation with HR, I'm going to speak to them, whatever it is, make sure you've got that in writing and send it to the people who were in the meeting, and you've got that and you can follow that up. And if you need to take things further, which hopefully you don't, but it can happen, you've got that paper trail and you've got that evidence, for want of a better phrase, should you need it in future. So yeah, I think that's, in a nutshell, that's what I would recommend. And
those were some really, really great actionable tips. So thank you so much for going through this in such detail, Claire. That was really, really helpful, I think. Maybe assuming that I'm on the other side of the table, so to say, what is your recommendation for managers, or also maybe, you know, where can I go as maybe a people manager to educate myself more on topics around women's health in the workplace? Because, you know, sometimes it's just that we don't know what we don't know often. So if I am somebody that has identified that, you know, maybe I don't know enough about women's health, or not as much as I should, where can I go to sort of learn more?
What I would say to that is, if I was head of people in an organization and I was serious about women's health, or, you know, just broader gender diversity and inclusion, I would set up a women's network. That would be the first thing I would do. And I would make it my mission to understand some of the issues that people are dealing with within the organization. Because again, it depends on the demographic of the workforce, in terms of age and conditions they might be facing, or the life stage, because there is an association with age and some of these conditions. So I would set up a women's network. I would meet with women in the organization, and I would just start the conversation first and foremost and find out, you know, do you have any, you know, struggles with your menstrual cycle? What could we do as an organization to kind of support women's health? And that, I think, is a really organic way to learn about these things, to learn about the things that are important to employees, and also to empower women to talk, because that's a really crucial piece of this puzzle. It's giving people permission to talk openly, to break that stigma, to break the silence. So that's, I think, a really positive first step. Beyond that, in terms of resources and things like that, this is by no means a plug, but this is why we exist at See Her Thrive. This is what we're passionate about and knowledgeable in, and we've worked with, God, probably hundreds of organisations now, to deliver education and training and talks and webinars and lunch and learns and whatever else, all related to women's health. So definitely reach out to us. We can help. There are some really great online resources. So we've got things like the British Menopause Society as an example. What I would say is there's not so much around women's health in the workplace specifically. If you go and Google that, you're not going to find much, but you might look to the kind of bigger organisations and charities. I know, for instance, Perla Health, you're going to be doing stuff around PCOS in the workplace. So that's going to be a crucial resource for employers. But just talking to women, I think, is first and foremost. This is the kind of thing that really we can't, and when I'm working with organisations, I'll ask the questions about, you know, what do you think are the issues? Because it's all well and good saying, oh, well, we need to do menopause awareness training and stuff. And what if that's not actually what people want to learn about and what people want to hear? What if it is about fertility treatment and supporting employees through fertility at work? So I think it needs a tailored approach.
That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that, Claire. Maybe to wrap up, so obviously you've done a lot of work in the field of women's health in the workplace, and also sort of advocating for women's health in that role, and also in your work with the International Association for Premenstrual Disorders. So we are doing this because it's PCOS Awareness Month, and it's always every year also a bit of a time for women with PCOS like myself, when we start to think about what can I do to help with advocacy? How do I start? How can I be an effective advocate, and sort of make sure there's more awareness and less stigma around these conditions? I'm sort of curious, from the work you've done in the past, what some of the things that you've learned are in terms of being an effective advocate.
Oh, it's such a good question. I would say there's so much power in sharing your own personal story as a starting point. And the minute you open up about that and share that with people, you'll find other people come forward and start talking, and maybe you trigger a light bulb moment for someone. If you're talking about your own experience, maybe they've been living with symptoms that they've never even attributed to PCOS, and all of a sudden you can help other women get the right treatment and support just by being open about what you've gone through and what you've experienced. I know we hear a lot about sharing vulnerability and being vulnerable and being open. I think it's just about being human and recognizing that we are humans and we have health conditions, and we all have our struggles. And you talked earlier about bringing our whole selves to work. We really need to do that. We really absolutely need to do that, not just pay it lip service, but we need to bring our whole imperfect selves to work, in the same way that we expect, in a relationship, to be able to share our best side and our uglier side, if you were, for want of a better phrase. It's not uglier, but our good bits and our bad bits with our partner. I really think that we need to be able to do that with our colleagues and our co-workers and our employer if we want to. So sharing your story, and really it's up to you how you do that. People sometimes reach out to bloggers and newspapers, magazines, and really go wide with this and share their story, and amplify it as far as they can. Other people will put on a talk. I know people who've done talks in their workplace about this was PMDD, but you could do the same for PCOS, and that's great because it gives the education piece. And again, it's an opportunity, if you want to share your own personal experience. And if you do that, you're a trailblazer. You're opening that door for the other women that you work with to find their voice. And it's really emotional, actually, when you do that and other people start to talk and you share stories, you share treatments, you share journeys of diagnosis and all of the struggles you've had and all of the shitty experiences of gaslighting and healthcare. And there's so much comfort in that, and it's cathartic. It really is. And so I think if I was to say one thing about advocacy, it is the power of your own personal journey and experience, and sharing that with others and inviting them to share their story.
That's a beautiful note to end on, I think. Thank you so much, Claire, for being here today. And if there's any questions with regards to women's health in the workplace, we'll obviously pass them on to you, and also share the material you've put together around PCOS in the workplace, how it shows up with some recommendations. Claire, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you.